All my books are interactive, touch and feel kind of preschool books, and dogs just fit what I was trying to do. And I wanted to do photography just because the dogs kind of work better as photos, only because they're just cuter in reality than they are when you try and draw them. And there's so many different types of dogs that it would work. And also there's so many different kind of textures and mechanics that work with a dog that it just was kind of a good fit, because there were so many things you could do with a little mechanic that is something that a dog would do. So it's just kind of an easy animal to do a mechanical kind of touchy-feely book with. I always try and keep them somewhat educational, because my earlier books were all basic concept books. Like my first book was a counting book, my second book was a shape book, my third book was a 3D shape book, the next one was an opposite book. So I try and keep some kind of educational value to them as far as like a preschool concept in them. But this book and Tales are a little more fun. They do have like opposites and educational concepts in them, but I wanted them to be a lot more fun with the rhyming and everything, more so than the educational part. I still do try and tie them in somewhat, so there's somewhat of a purpose to having the textures and the mechanics, so that, you know, the kid is tying in the word with the motion and not just kind of throwing in the motion or throwing in the texture for absolutely no reason at all, like just saying, slap a texture on there and there it is, without even describing what the texture is. There's got to be some kind of reason for why it's there other than just sticking a novelty on it. We had fun with the dogs. You kind of knew what we wanted, but, you know, they never did what we wanted anyway, so we just kind of filtered through all these shots we took, and some things popped up that worked and others didn't. It was a lot of fun. The dogs were just a blast to see all these different kinds of dogs. I mean, I have two little pugs, but they're completely different than every other kind of dog we had. None of them were professional animals, so none of them were ready to get their pictures taken, so they weren't trained in any sense at all. By the time we had done it over, 6 months or even longer, by the time the end of it rolled around, we kind of learned ourselves how to handle the dogs and kind of make noises to get them look a certain way, but we just winged it, and the dogs were pretty much, for the most part, great. They were for non-trained dogs or anything, but it wasn't like we were trying to get them to do anything really specific. We just lucked out. Like if we were trying to get them to scratch, none of them would do it. We just lucked out that the one dog, the owner said, oh, he scratches when you tickle him, so she tickled him and he scratched, and it worked out perfectly. But if we had to do that with any other dog, we would have never gotten the shot. We just lucked out that that particular dog was able to do it. The way I usually come up with any of my books is that I kind of come up with the text first and the idea first, and then once I know what the idea is, then I work backwards to make it work. I don't necessarily sit there and stare at a gear mechanic and say, what can I do with this? It's more that I think of, like, what does a dog do, which is like scratch, wag, shake, those things. I actually make lists of every possible thing, which is pretty much how I do all my books. I actually make long, long lists of every conceivable possible thing they could be, whether it's a texture, a sound, you know, a smell, emotion, anything at all. And I come up with these pages of however many things I can think of, and then I whittle it down and I look at them and I see what fits, what doesn't, what could work as a mechanic. And then once I have things that might work, then I go about the problem of how am I going to make this thing work as a mechanic or a texture or the technical parts of it, because some things you might come up with that don't necessarily work, like the original mechanic I'd come up with for the entire book, which was short and long dog, which was to take this dachshund that's at the last end of the book, stick him on a pull tab and have him become short and long. I started out with that, and then I wrote the rest of the book, came up with more stuff, and then I realized that it looked almost grotesque when I actually went to do the mechanic for the dog. And lo and behold, that one was the one I didn't use because it just didn't work when you actually went to execute it. And that's another reason I don't sign books up until they're completely done as comics, because something that works in your head or as a little thumbnail sometimes, or more often than not, doesn't work when you try and actually do the finished thing or do a more refined version of it.